Hey guys, as part of my Digital Asia class, I've decided to investigate genetically modified crops in Asia. As Asia's a big place and there are a lot of different cultures, I've decided to specifically investigate Japan, Thailand, South Korea and China. Let's go have a look. First off, I want to talk about the bias I have going into this project. I've been to Asia all of 3 times ever, summing less than 2 months total travel time, and I've got to say I don't know anything about their crop culture, so we can assume that my knowledge going into this is effectively zero. I do, however, have a lot of experience with science and scientific content, as well as the biases that are present in Australia, where GMOs are kind of surrounded by mystique and mystery. In my first blog post for this subject, I made the mistake of assuming that everyone knew what I meant when I said GMO. Now, I wanted to be a genetic engineer when I was in high school, and I have a pretty strong base level of knowledge that shouldn't come standard, so it was pretty insane for me to assume so. I corrected this mistake in blog post number 2, which will also be linked down below, but to save you some time, I made a handy extra video if your knowledge on GMOs needs a refresher. Let me just say that there have been thousands of studies on GMOs, none of which have proved that they're unsafe for human consumption. This is the base point that I have when I'm going into this project. It's easy to see why people are confused about GMOs. There's a wealth of information on the internet, but all of it's convoluted and contradictory. There are journal articles which use scientific language that's too difficult to understand, and there's websites that seem plain unreliable. So it's easy to see why people don't understand, let alone like, GMOs. In my investigation, I found that the GMO climate in every Asian country is not good. All 4 countries have really strict regulations on whether you're allowed to cultivate GMOs. The resounding answer is probably don't. They're all essentially worried about the same thing, that the GMOs will spread and affect the purity of the natural crops that they have. So I investigated the claim that GMOs have been infecting natural strains, and the reports were, to say the least, confusing. In Japan alone, one report said that 33% of organic products, therefore GMO-free, were contaminated by GMO DNA. However, on the same website, they had a report saying that only 0.1% were. The information seems to be a little bit all over the place. During my investigation, I was surprised to see that it was the purity, but not the genetic diversity that most people seem to be worried about. Genetic diversity is what helps protect crops from dangers. By having slight differences in the genetic pool of different crops, they can better resist against different hazards such as insects or diseases. The potato famine in Ireland was created because there was little genetic diversity in the potato plant, so once one got sick, they all got sick. Now, worrying about the genetic diversity would be a legitimate fear. However, it's never seemed to come up on any of the anti-GMO websites I can find for any of the countries. Though it was hard to pin down any one reason that all of the countries didn't like genetically modified crops, I did find some clues for China. China banned all GM crops in 2006 due to public fears. However, in 2008, the Chinese government allowed the development of a new strain of rice that would be resistant to insects. This just happened to coincide with a government scandal which led to powdered milk being cut with a chemical used in plastics. This led to the death of 54 babies. To the Chinese public, it seemed like letting this development for the GM strain was just another symptom of a corrupt government that wasn't trying to protect their best interests. This isn't what surprised me most about China. I naively assumed that a lot of people had a problem with GMOs because they were relatively uneducated or uninformed. However, out of the 84% of Chinese people that don't want GMOs, it seems that the more educated they were, the more likely they were to be against it. This really kind of took me aback. The Chinese government is at odds with its people as well. It's one of the only governments that's actively trying to encourage people to accept GMOs because they've realised that it's the only way they're going to feed their massive population. The Thai government also tried to introduce GMOs, but only in a time of crisis, such as war or natural disaster, to feed a hungry population. However, had to cancel any plans to introduce them due to massive protests from the Thai population. I think the most important thing that I've learned from this project is trying to put myself into people's shoes that don't have a scientific education. I've been pretty privileged with the information that I have access to and the fact that my mind works in a scientific way, and I've got to learn that if I'm to understand what other people are thinking, I've got to recognize that they don't think like me. Overall, I'm going to try to continue to spread the good word about GMOs, however I will be more receptive to people's fears in the future.